Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation. I thought I'd take the opportunity to go over some of the major changes in the most recent release of ScoutsTracker. Now while I don't normally do a presentation for any specific release, in this particular case, because there are significant changes to the way that member data is stored and presented, it would be helpful to go over those changes and see how they impact you. But I think the first step is to actually do a bit of a review of how things used to work up until version 18 and what was painful or annoying and why these changes were made. So let's go through a thought experiment. Imagine a paper-based system where there's no ScoutsTracker involved and you're a cub in a pack. As a cub, you've got a uniform which includes a gray shirt. This tells people you're in pack. You might wear a special woggle which tells people whether you're a tracker, a runner, or a howler. If you belong to a lair, you've probably got an insignia so people can identify which kids should be together. And there's a bunch of other information that all identify you as belonging to a specific pack and in that pack having a specific role. Moreover, you carry around a big binder, and in this binder there's a section for all of your badge progression as you go through the scouting program. There's also, in the front of the book, a page for your emergency information, your allergies, your dietary restrictions, any other health issues, as well as emergency contact numbers and addresses. There's probably also a page for any qualifications you might earn, such as your Bronze Cross or your standard first aid. And there's also some other identifying information. But now you finally finish up with the pack and you move up to Scouts. As part of this process, you get a new uniform. Now the shirt is green to show that you're in troop. Whether you're a howler, a tracker, or a runner doesn't matter anymore because now you're in troop, you get a pioneer woggle. And you're going to be assigned to a new patrol, so you're going to have a new patrol insignia. You might even have a new necker if you move to a different group. And again, all of this information identifies you as belonging to a specific troop, and in that troop, having a specific role. But before you join the troop at the advancement ceremony, your pack scouters hand you a new binder. It's a photocopy of the binder in which they recorded all of your information. It's got the same section for your badge progression because that's going to be your starting point in troop. It's got the same emergency information, your dietary restrictions, your allergies, the emergency contact information, and it's got all of the qualifications that you've already earned. You can then take this binder over to the troop and they'll start to use that binder to record all of your subsequent advancement. Meanwhile, your former pack scouters just take your old binder and they shove it on a shelf in the storage closet. It's not needed anymore because you've left the pack, but it's possible that it could need to be referenced at some point, so they'll just keep it safe. Meanwhile, your troop takes your new binder and they start using it. So when you participate in the welcome back camp for the troop and you complete a bunch of outdoor adventure skills requirements, that'll be recorded. Or if they offer a standard or first aid course at the beginning of the season for all members, they can record the fact that you now have a new qualification. Most of the time this is a perfectly acceptable strategy. It's okay that your binder's just gathering dust on the shelf because you're done with the pack. You're not doing anything with them anymore. There's no need for it to be updated. What is being updated is your troop's copy of the big binder, and that has become the de facto official record for you. It shows where you're standing in the program, what your current emergency information is, what your current qualifications are. It's the binder that's being updated, so it's the official one. But what happens if you had linked up rather than moved up? So at the advancement ceremony on May 13th, you'd been introduced to the troop and you received a photocopy of your big binder and you started to do things with them. But in the meantime, you continued to do things with your old pack until, say, the end of June. Perhaps there was an end-of-year howler camp that you'd all been looking forward to, and you did a bunch of outdoor adventure skills requirements. Or perhaps you participate in your last few community service hours that you needed to earn your C&E award. As always, the pack is dutifully going to record all of your accomplishments in their big binder for you. But it's important to remember that the troop only has a photocopy of your big binder. And that photocopy was made on May 13th at the advancement ceremony. And it contains a snapshot of what your progress was that date. It doesn't contain any of the stuff you did at the Howler camp or the fact that you received your C&E award. So the big binder you have in troop is now actually out of date. By the same token, the troop's big binder has been updated with your first few accomplishments from the Welcome Back camp and the fact that you participated in the standard first aid course. So it too contains information that's not included in the pack's original binder. So you have two binders that both contain somewhat different information now. So historically, the solution to youth that were linking up between sections was to make sure that the old section, for example your pack, moved you up to Scouts again when you finally finished with Cubs. This is something that they had to remember to do. In doing so, they'd create a second photocopy of their big binder that you used in pack. This big binder would now include all of the accomplishments that you did since the previous photocopy. So it would include all the stuff from the Howler camp and the fact that you earned your C&E award. Of course, this photocopy is still the pack's view, so it's missing all the stuff that you've done with your new troop. But as a result of being moved up twice, the troop is going to discover that there's now two copies of you in their roster. One was created on May 13th at the advancement ceremony, and the other was created at the end of June when you finally left the pack. And each of those copies has their own big binder that contains slightly different information. But at this point, maybe we should do a reality check. There is no cloning machine. Nobody's making exact duplicates of the youth. In fact, there's not even any physical binders. The existence of physical binders was the reason that ScoutsTracker was created in the first place. As a scouter, I felt that the risk of losing the information in those binders, or having it seen by the wrong people, was just too high. So ScoutsTracker makes sure that the members' data is safe and only seen by the appropriate people. So in this presentation, when you see any reference to Big Binder, please understand that we're talking about the data. We're talking about a collection of records in the secure database that's associated with a specific member. And when we say that we photocopy that binder, what we're really talking about is doing a duplication of all the records into a new collection that's associated with a different roster member. So let's get back to our example. A consequence of your pack scouters having moved you up to troop twice is that there's now two records for you in the troop roster. Luckily, ScoutsTracker has always offered the ability to merge members. So administrator for the troop account can now select both copies of you and merge them. And fundamentally what this will do is this will create a single blended copy of your two big binders. So it will now contain the latest information from your final pack activities, such as your participation in the Howler camp or your C&E award, as well as what's recently been recorded by troop. For example, your participation in the Welcome Back camp or your first aid certification. So this whole process of having the pack scouters move you up to troop twice, and then having the troop scouters handle any duplicates by merging, well, it works, but it's a little bit clunky. In particular, the pack scouters have to remember that anybody who's linking up needs to be moved up again. Otherwise, the troop isn't going to have any knowledge of their last few activities with the pack. And troop scouters continually have to end up merging duplicates that keep popping up in their rosters every time the pack scouters decide to move you up again. Neither does it address the problem that the pack's big binder will be forever out of date, because the binder stops being updated as soon as you leave the pack, and none of your activities in the troop will ever be communicated back down to the pack. Another bit of clunkiness affects those members who are actively involved in multiple sections. You might be a scouter wearing multiple hats and helping out with both the A and the B colonies, or you might be a venturer who belongs to a regular company and also a medvent company and does activities with both. In these cases, there's a constant chore of making sure that you remember to communicate any changes to all the other sections. If you get an additional qualification, you have to share that. If your emergency information changes, you get a new cell phone number, you have to communicate that. Otherwise, each of the sections you're involved with will have different information. So the information needs to be communicated, and each big binder has to be individually updated. So what's a better way to do things? Well, as a start, why don't we just stop making a photocopy of the binder every time somebody switches sections? Why don't we just let them all use the same binder? Give them shared access to this binder, regardless of what they're involved with. In our example so far, what this means is that if, as you participated in the end of your Howler camp, and then completed a first aid course in troop, and then you went back to pack and you completed your C&E award, it would all be recorded in a single binder. This is awesome. This takes care of so many problems. Moreover, this means that the process of moving between sections actually becomes quite simple. All you need is a new uniform in the way that we described at the very beginning of this presentation, i.e. the information that identifies you as belonging to a specific section and having a specific role in that section. In ScoutsTracker, we're now calling that collection of information a scouting role. So it could detail that you're a venturer with the 1st Muddy Paw Company, or that you're a scouter with the 1st Muddy Paw Colony, or that previously you were a cub in some other group. Those are all scouting roles that you've had. And another benefit of using a shared big binder is that ScoutsTracker can actually look up which scouting roles have shared access to the same binder. So for example, your old role in pack and your new role in troop. So ScoutsTracker knows for certain whether you already belong to a section. This has the nice side effect. It means when you get moved up, ScoutsTracker doesn't bother creating another you in the troop roster when the pack scouters try to move you up again, because you already exist. It can tell there's someone using the same big binder. And this means that you as scouters will only rarely need to use the merge functionality, so this is much simpler. Now I'd like to step back and discuss how member information is going to be presented in ScoutsTracker. And to do that, we're going to start by looking at a real-world resume, just as you'd use in your professional career. All resumes include information about the person. Their name, their phone number and email are typically at the top of the resume. There's always a section on education, what qualifications you've achieved, and there's typically sections on your interests and hobbies. It's all information about you. And there's also a history of your work experience. So typically you're going to find your current job at the top, and then all of your other past jobs and volunteer roles listed below those. And at the very bare minimum, it's going to include what your title was at the job, the company you worked at, and the dates you held that position. And it's starting to feel like scouting information could be presented the same way, because we've got some information about you as a person. We've got your name and phone numbers, your qualifications, your badge progression. These are all things about you and what you've accomplished so far. How have you accomplished that? Well, that's listed through the history of your involvement in different sections. We might put the current scouting roles at the top and all of your past scouting roles after that. And again, the minimum information that we'd want to show is your position within the section, the name of the section of the group, and the dates that you were in that section. So this is in fact how information about a member is now being presented in ScoutsTracker. It's being done in a number of sections. The first one being the details about the person, and the second is about their current role, and the third is about all of their other scouting roles. So this is just like a resume. There's even a section at the top which lets you jump quickly down to each of those sections. So while it may be obvious that the information about you as a person is what we've been collecting in your big binder, we do have a question of how are all of your other scouting roles being identified? How do we figure out what goes into the list of your work experience, so to speak? Well, the really good news is that moving forward, your scouting roles will just naturally grow as you move between sections. So when you're transferred or moved up to a new section, the new member that's created always uses the same big shared binder. ScoutsTracker can then look through the database and find all the roster members in all the sections who use the same binder and present that in a list. So we can see here that Jen is a scouter in the Beavers, she's a venturer in the Muddy Paw Venturers, and she used to be a cub. But some of you might have noticed that I said moving forward and are now asking, but what about all the historical information we've collected? You know, we've got youth who have been in the program since Beavers and Cubs. How does their information get brought forward? And again, the good news here is that this generally happens naturally. An account is migrated to version 18 as soon as the first person in your section connects to it. This will trigger a one-time migration of all the members in your account. And this migration happens on the server in the background, so you can close your browser, it doesn't matter. If you reconnect, it'll just pick up where it left off and it'll show you where it's how far it's got. As for how long this migration takes, it's about 1 to 7 seconds per roster member. It really depends on the amount of information that has to be stuffed into a shared binder. So very large old accounts with lots and lots of data can actually take a few minutes to migrate. And unfortunately, you can't use your account until the migration is entirely finished. So if you connect and you see a migration message and it looks like it'll take a while, just go grab a coffee, do something else. So how do you tell if your account is being migrated? Well, the first time someone in your section connects to your account, it triggers a migration, and if anybody tries to connect while this is going on, they'll see something like this screenshot here. It tells you that it's being updated, and there's a rough progress bar showing how far it's progressed. This updates every few seconds. And you just wait for it to be done. So now this section gets a little more visual. Some people learn best by listening, some people learn best by reading, and some people learn best by seeing things. So it's a bit of a description of what happens during the migration. So when a migration is triggered, of course, as soon as the first person in an account connects to their account, ScoutsTracker iterates over all of the active and inactive members in your roster. And it takes the old data and splits that into basically two chunks, or tables for the technically oriented. It's got the scouting role, which we had described earlier as your uniform. It describes what position you have in a particular troop or section. And then there's all the big binder stuff like your qualifications, your badge progression, your emergency information. All of those things used to be stored together, but that's why sharing of the binder portion was impossible up until now, because it was impossible to share just a chunk of the old member data. So we've now pulled it out into two separate storage bins and to make the sharing possible. But when each member is migrated, of course, the information is split into the scouting role and the big binder, but at the same time, it looks through the rest of the database and tries to find any other member in any other section who shares some key attributes that might make us assert that this is the same person. And in particular, ScoutsTracker looks for a match in the Scouts Canada member number or a match in the full name, as long as it's accompanied by both members being accessed by the same login email address. So in the screen, you'll see that there's somebody from the 99th Rubber Boot Pack, and there's no match with any of the emails, but there are two emails matching from Colony and Troop that reference big binders that have the same Scouts Canada number. So we're pretty sure that the two columns on the right represent the same person. Whenever we find a situation like this, we can automatically trigger a merge of the binders, and we come up with a blended big binder, and both the scouting roles are now flagged as using that big binder. And this doesn't necessarily just happen once. As subsequent accounts get migrated, for example the pack, if there's someone in the pack roster who has the same scouting member number and is accessed by the same login email address, then we can say, oh, hey, here's another scouting role that should be using the same big binder, and it will blend that person's big binder. And so we'll see that, you know, Jen the Cub is using the same big binder as Jen the Scout and the Colony Scouter called Keo. So now all three people share the same binder, and regardless of whom you're looking at, you can see the other roles being listed in their other scouting roles section. So as more and more accounts get migrated, you'll find your members' scouting roles will automatically get fleshed out. Additionally, these relationships can be found during an import from My Scouts. During such an import, if ScoutsTracker needs to create a new member, it will first check through the entire database looking for any other member in any other section with whom it can possibly share a blended big binder. This can be kind of useful. For example, if the Colony Scouters haven't yet moved up all of the whitetails, but the pack scouters are already eager to go, and they do an import from My Scouts and they find some new cubs who used to be the whitetails in the colony. If ScoutsTracker can find an existing beaver, so one of the whitetails, who seems to be the same person, then it will do the exact same thing of blending the two binders, and that means that the pack scouters instantly can start updating the former beavers progress to date, badge progress to date, without having to wait for the Colony Scouters to actually do the update. And from a safety perspective, as soon as the import has happened, they'll have access to all the important emergency information that the Colony Scouters may have collected over the years. So this is another way in which your member scouting roles will automatically get fleshed out over time. But to be clear, the automatic identification and sharing of people's binders during either account migration or import from My Scouts only happens when a couple of key criteria are met. Specifically, there has to be an exact match between the Scouts Canada member numbers or an exact match in the full names, and both members have to be accessed by a common login email address. That still leaves us with some situations. For example, in the colony, perhaps there is an under 18 Colony Scouter called Jennifer Allaire, who is the Keo, and she has decided to use her own email address to sign into the colony account instead of her mom's. In this case, when ScoutsTracker does the import, it will never be able to be confident that Jennifer Allaire Keo, with Scouts Canada member number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is the same person as Jen Allaire in the troop. Scouts Canada member 1234. Yes, of course, they do have the same Scouts Canada member number, but typos happen. And it could be that just a simple typographic error when entering data in the colony meant that Keogh's member number, instead of being 12354, was entered as 12345. And really, they're two different people. ScoutsTracker can't tell this automatically. But you, as a scouter, will certainly know whether Keogh, the under 18 colony scouter, is actually the same person as the scout. There's a similar name, but you know them both. You know that Jen is volunteering with the colony. So you can then tell ScoutsTracker that indeed they are the same person. And to do that, use a new feature called Add Other Scouting Role. So the way this feature works is if you drill down to any member, so for example account Scouters Keogh, and scroll down to a description of their current role in this troop or this section, you'll see that there's a ScoutsTracker Scouting Role ID value and a copy button. If you click that and then send it to an admin in, say, Jen's other sections, maybe her troop or her company, the scouter in that account can then go to drill down to Jen and click Add Other Scouting Role. Paste in the ID received, and then this will tell ScoutsTracker that these two people are actually the same, and once again there will be a merging or blending of the two binders. But before you get too excited and start getting really gung-ho about fleshing out all your members' scouting histories to give them as complete a possible picture of their scouting journey, there are consequences. So a person's scouting roles will grow naturally over time, so you don't really have to flesh them out. Yes, you can. You can force it to be done sooner by using the Add Other Scouting Role feature, but it's a nice to have feature. It doesn't impact them moving forward. And keep in mind that if you were to add another scouting role, and if you were to mistakenly specify the wrong person and ignore all the warnings about, hey, the name's different, hey, the scouting member's different, you'll end up merging their two big binders. And this would be devastating because it would be all of their qualifications, all of their emergency information, and their badge progression collected from years and years of data would now be just irrevocably jumbled together. And sorry, there's just nothing support can do to help you sort it out. If you do that, you pretty much got to start all over again with those two members. So yes, if you actually need to do a Add Other Scouting Role, this is great. And one example is that we'll discuss in the next couple of slides is having a parent-initiated transfer. That's why this feature exists. It's to help solve those very specific problems. But if you're just doing it because the concept of an incomplete record irks you, and you want to do this so you have better records, then keep in mind that as you do a lot of data entry, there's a good chance that at some point you're going to make a mistake and add the wrong person's scouting role. And then you'll have permanently screwed up two people's records. And if I wasn't plain enough before, ScoutsTracker support will not be able to help you sort this out. So, my recommendation, use this feature sparingly, just when you need to minimize the risk of making a mistake and screwing up data. So up until version 18, the only way that a member's records could be transferred or moved to a new section was if they were pushed by an admin in the old section. Specifically, they drill down to that particular member, then push transfer or move up, and they had to know the new account section key. This actually wasn't too bad in most cases if you're talking about just moving up within the group, because if you've got collaboration enabled, then everybody knows everybody's section key in the group. But things get a little messier when a group folds. In this case, there's no scouters around who can initiate the transfer. Or the youth has moved to completely across the country or to a different city, and the scouters in the old section don't know who to ask for the section key of the new account. It's possible, but it requires a lot of communication between the parents who want their kids' records moved, the new scouters, and then the parents have to get back in touch with the old scouters, or the old scouters have to be put in touch with the new scouters, etc. And so there's a lot of toing and froing that make this rather cumbersome. With version 13, there's now a way for parents, or actually any other member, a scout, other participant, scouter, to fetch their own scouting role IDs. And they can then share them with the scouters in their new section so that those scouters can add them to the roster. So everybody has access to this Move to a Different Group button. The button can be found on the sign-in page if you're not currently signed in, or if you are signed in and you automatically connect, you'll find it under Account, Use a Different Login. When the person clicks this button, it'll send them an email that contains all of the pertinent scouting role IDs. The email also includes instructions to forward the email to a scouter in the new section. And it includes instructions for the scouter in the new section to click Account, Scouts, Add, and Import by ID. That's a new ability. And this will add the youth to the roster. Or if they already have a youth stub entry for that youth in their section, they can click on Add Other Scouting Role, which we previously discussed, and this will make sure that the binders are all blended correctly and everybody knows about everybody else's role. So this is a cool new way that parents can actually initiate a transfer. Earlier I'd said that there wasn't much need to merge anymore, and indeed, because ScoutsTracker can automatically detect who's using a shared big binder, during move up and transfer, if someone with that same big binder already exists, then there's no need to actually do the transfer because the person already exists in the account, and so the odds of ending up with duplicate members in your roster is very low. So in general, you won't need to merge anyone anymore. But of course, there are always edge cases that aren't covered by these simple rules. Consider the situation where you have some kid show up to the very first meeting of the year. You've never heard about them. They tell you they're registered. They don't know what their Scouts Canada member number is, and they don't even know whether they should be using mom or dad's email address. But hey, you don't want to block a kid from participating in scouting, so you just manually add them to a roster and maybe identify just by their name, like pretend it's Harry. You then have your meeting and update everybody's badge progress at the end, including the new Harry. Sometime later, eventually, the old section will get around to transferring the records, or maybe your group will do an import from My Scouts, and suddenly we'll have the real records. But because there's not much information in your manually entered youth, the one called Harry, ScoutsTracker ends up creating a new member for Harold Zeng in your roster. In this situation, there was no way for ScoutsTracker to figure out that Harry was actually the same person as Harold Zeng. There's no match on Scouts Canada member number. There's no match on login email address. There's just no hope. So that's why you end up getting a new record during the import. But because you know that Harry and Harold are actually the same person, you can still do an old style merge. And everything will be blended perfectly and everybody will be happy. And the last thing I wanted to mention is there's a new feature. Part of a person's big binder is now their preferred pronouns. You can optionally specify the pronouns that a member would prefer people use. This just then shows up as a reminder or just a little highlight when you look at a list of youth in the when you go to Account Scouts or Account Scouters, or when you're looking at their photos in the gallery. And it'll just highlight that, you know, Jen likes to go by she, her, and NB likes to go by they, them. And of course, because this is part of the big binder, it's shared across all of their scouting roles. So if this ever gets updated, it'll be instantly viewable on all other accounts. So that's all I really wanted to cover in this presentation. Normally, now I'd ask for questions from the audience, but since this is a pre-recorded presentation, there's not a lot of interactivity. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them in the ScoutsTracker discussion group on Facebook, or you can send them to me in an email at support@scoutstracker.ca, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for your time, and please enjoy version 18.